You sit in the quiet of your room, the glow of your screen, reflecting a message that's just come in. It's from them. The person who once vanished, who pulled back just when you needed clarity, has now returned. No explanation, just a vague, "Hey." A lowercase letter with the weight of past silence behind it. Your chest tightens, your thumb hovers, but you don't reply, not yet. Because deep down you remember what the Stoics taught. What made Roman emperors never worry about the future. Marcus Aurelius had the power to silence anyone in his court. But the power he valued more was internal silence. The discipline not to react, not even to insult, to betrayal, or to manipulation. And tonight, as your phone buzzes again, you feel the urge to act, to demand answers, to say something clever, to win. But if you do, you lose the very thing Marcus worked a lifetime to build: inner command. There's a flickering candle on the desk beside you. You imagine yourself not as a victim waiting for a response, but as a philosopher in a quiet Roman courtyard. Scrolls laid open, cicadas in the distance, and a single truth written clearly in your mind. Silence is a lesson in itself. The ones who speak impulsively reveal their dependence on external validation. The one who waits, listens, and speaks only with intent rules himself. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. To understand this better, let's go back to an ancient lesson from Marcus Aurelius. He once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And so when silence stretches across days or weeks, and the world expects you to fill it with a reaction, the Stoic instead breathes. He lets the silence stretch further. Because silence is not an empty act. It is presence. It is power. It is the space where reason wakes. You recall the moment you stopped begging for explanations. It wasn't dramatic. It was still. Like the first time Marcus refused to argue with an arrogant senator in public. He didn't engage. He looked. He waited. He said nothing. And in that silence, the crowd understood who had already won. Because here's what no one tells you: silence makes others uncomfortable, especially those who expect drama. They want to pull you into their emotional world, to trigger you, to make you spiral. But when you don't play along, when you don't fire back, when you offer no closure, no chase, no collapse into their performance, you become something far more unnerving than angry. You become untouchable. And scholars still wonder, did the Stoics undervalue emotional expression? Or did they understand something we've forgotten? That reaction is not the same as authenticity. That the most real part of you is not the one who blurts out a reply, but the one who chooses when and if to respond at all. So tonight, as you stare at that blinking message, you pause. You see the old pattern rearing its head, the need to answer, to prove you're above it, to sting them with wit. But you stop. Because that isn't strength. That's performance. And you're done performing. You close your eyes. You remember who you are. You choose stillness because stillness isn't weakness, it's the highest form of control. Your phone remains dark now, resting face down on the table like a sealed scroll. There's something liberating about not answering, not because you want to win, but because you no longer need to engage. You sit back in your chair, remembering the words of Epictetus. It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. That message didn't hurt you. Your belief that it should have, that's where the disturbance began. You begin to realize how many conversations in your life were performances. You weren't replying to understand or connect. You were replying to control, to defend your name, to protect your pride. And often the more you said, the more you lost yourself. but silence. Silence demands none of that. It requires only that you be still long enough to listen to the situation, to your thoughts, to your true response, if one is even needed. There's a story about Marcus Aurelius when he was still a young student of Stoicism. A senator accused him of showing favoritism in court. The crowd expected a rebuttal, a flare of indignation. But Marcus remained quiet. When asked later why he didn't defend himself, he replied, "If it is false, it deserves no reply. If it is true, I should be silent anyway." That's the heart of the Stoic approach. You are not here to manage how others see you. You are here to manage how you govern yourself. So you learn to pause. You let silence hang like incense in the air, uncomfortable to some, sacred to others. You let the moment pass without reaching to grasp or shape it. Still, doubt creeps in. What if they think they've won? You ask yourself this as if it matters, as if someone else's illusion of victory should shape your next move. But it's only your ego speaking an echo of the world that taught you your worth must be defended, your silence interpreted as weakness. Stoicism rewrites that story. It teaches you that if someone misunderstands your silence, that's their battle, not yours. And here's where scholars raise the old debate again: is Stoicism too passive? Shouldn't you speak truth to power? Isn't silence sometimes complicity? These are valid questions, and they demand honest reflection. But the Stoics never said always be silent. They said, don't let your words come from impulse. Let them come from reason. So if you must speak, let it not be to destroy. Let it be to clarify, to heal, or to walk away with dignity. You pace across the room, recalling a conversation from years ago when you gave someone your whole heart in words, and they weaponized them. Used them against you later. Now with time and clarity, you understand why the Stoics held their words like blades, tools that could defend but also wound. That's why they were slow to draw them. Because restraint is not cowardice, it's mastery. There's something else you're learning when you stop chasing people who withdraw. You start returning to yourself. You reclaim hours once spent overanalyzing their tone, their pauses, their half-hearted replies. And in that space, you rediscover something deeper than any external validation: self-trust. The kind that whispers, you don't owe anyone your peace just because they regret leaving. So the next time a text appears, the kind that stirs up old storms, you remember the discipline you're cultivating. You breathe. You return to your principles, and you understand. Silence is not a strategy to manipulate. It is a sanctuary you build to protect what matters. Because real strength isn't measured by how loudly you speak. It's measured by how peacefully you live. The message reads, "Hey, I've been thinking about you." It's short, vague, casually phrased like nothing ever happened. And yet your breath catches for a second, because you remember. Not just what they did, but how much of yourself you gave in the silence that followed. This is the moment you prepared for. Not with a perfect reply, but with a deeper question: do I even need to respond? Seneca once wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." You've spent too many nights craving closure, clarity, apology. Now you understand the trap. Those cravings weren't about them. They were about your own discomfort with uncertainty. Your old self wanted every loose end tied, every misunderstanding corrected. But your Stoic self, the one you're becoming, knows better. You no longer crave. You assess. And what you assess here isn't the content of their message, but the intention behind it. Is it sincere? Is it curious? Is it selfish? But even those questions feel distant now, like fading smoke. Because the more pressing truth is this: you don't need to answer just because someone has finally noticed your absence. You think back to the Roman streets, narrow and crowded with lives intersecting. Marcus Aurelius walked those same streets under pressure from political rivals and whispering citizens. Yet he wrote in his Meditations, "Be like the cliff against which the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the water around it." Not every wave needed a response. Some only needed endurance. Scholars still debate the ethical line. Is ignoring someone ever moral? Is it Stoic detachment, or is it emotional avoidance? And while Stoicism doesn't teach ghosting, it does teach discernment. If silence becomes a tool to escape what you fear, it may be cowardice. But if silence is chosen because you've outgrown the need for petty interactions, then it becomes a form of self-respect. The truth is, not all replies serve your growth. Some only reopen wounds, reignite ego battles, or pull you back into a pattern you fought so hard to escape. A Stoic weighs every word like gold, because every word is a transaction. And when you reply from insecurity, you pay far more than you gain. You hold the phone gently. You don't rush. You sit with your breath. You imagine replying, and then you imagine what that reply would cost your peace. And quietly, you realize you've already answered them with your silence. Not as punishment, but as proof that your life moved forward without needing theirs to resume. And maybe, just maybe, that's what unsettles them most. That they left the conversation expecting a reaction. And instead, they were met with presence. With a version of you that no longer clings to unfinished sentences or vague apologies. A version of you who's learned that not all validation is valuable. That sometimes the most elegant reply is no reply at all. So you smile softly, not because you're playing a game, but because you're no longer a piece on the board. And that is its own kind of freedom. You don't chase. You observe. That is the difference now. Where once you might have scrambled to prove your worth in a string of perfectly worded replies, you now sit still because you've realized that stillness is power. This is the silent center of Stoicism. It isn't cold, it's composed, and yet even composure is tested. Because after the silence, when they reach out again, a part of you flinches. Not out of longing, but out of habit. The instinct to engage, to make peace, to be understood, it lingers like smoke in old robes. You're tempted to respond with a passive-aggressive edge to destroy their ego, as the phrase goes. But true Stoicism doesn't seek destruction. It seeks transcendence. Marcus Aurelius never wrote about revenge. He wrote about virtue, about discipline, about the quiet satisfaction of doing the right thing even when others don't deserve it. He said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." And there it is. That's your edge. That's the reply that requires no words. Still, scholars debate what Marcus truly meant by that. Was he encouraging pure detachment, or was it an emotional strategy? Could a Roman emperor, constantly surrounded by betrayal, really live by these words? Many say he struggled, that his writings were not declarations, but reminders. Not a record of success, but a practice of failing better each day. And you're not a marble statue either. You feel the pull to retaliate. You want your silence to sting your calm, to echo like thunder. But a deeper voice reminds you, if you act from the same place they did, then you are not rising above. You're simply mirroring. And that's not power. That's repetition. So how do you destroy their ego in the Stoic way? You don't. You let them keep it intact, noisy, desperate to be acknowledged, and you step outside the game. That's how the Stoic fights, not with fire, but with absence. There is a Roman strategy to this. When enemies provoked Seneca, he didn't write them letters. He wrote essays for himself. He penned down clarity in private. He turned conflict into inner refinement. You begin to understand why now. Because sometimes the best response is not a sentence. It's a standard. You reply not by responding, but by living well, by remaining peaceful, by refusing to shrink. You build a life so quiet and full that their return no longer echoes inside it. That's the message. That's the reply. And it doesn't need emojis or punctuation to land. You may say nothing at all, and yet you will be heard. Not through volume, but through vibration. Through the way you walk now more upright. The way your eyes no longer search rooms for validation. The way your evenings are spent not scrolling, but stretching. Not pleading, but breathing. That is how the ego breaks, not by being shouted down, but by being left alone in a room with nothing to feed it. That's how silence becomes strength, not by withholding, but by releasing. And the irony, the calmer you become, the louder your absence feels to those who once mistook you for fragile. You've stepped into the realm of true response now. Not with fury, not with pride, but with unshakable stillness. And for someone addicted to control, that's the most unbearable sound in the world. You breathe, not to center yourself before you respond, but because that breath is the response. The moment has come. They've reached out. Maybe it's days, maybe weeks since you last heard from them. The message is casual, too casual. A simple hey, as if nothing happened. As if silence wasn't a wound, and now they want to pretend they never held the knife. And yet, you feel no anger. You feel space. This is new. You pause not because you're unsure, but because stillness now serves you more than speech. There's a difference. You once used silence as punishment. Now it's preservation. Seneca said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." And what is a response to someone who wasted your time, if not another drop into the same bucket? You've come too far for that. Your minutes now are guarded, not with walls, but with clarity. And clarity doesn't seek drama, it seeks peace. You scroll up the old conversation, noticing the emotional weight of what you once tolerated. The way your messages used to bend, to explain, to justify. And you smile not bitterly, but with a sense of release. That person is no longer you. This conversation is no longer relevant. And maybe this reply doesn't even need to be typed. But this is the debate inside Stoicism. Do you respond to practice virtue, or do you withdraw to protect peace? Scholars differ. Some say Marcus Aurelius's restraint was strength. Others say it was loneliness. That behind his wisdom lay exhaustion, not just discipline. That sometimes even the most stoic hearts grow tired of carrying everything alone. You reflect on this as your thumb hovers over the reply box. What would a reply mean truly? Would it serve your values or your ego? Because that's the subtle trap. Sometimes silence masquerades as power when it's just fear. And other times a response disguised as strength is merely a cry for closure. You must know the difference. You reread the message again. You see it now not as bait, but as a mirror. What you do next isn't about them at all. It's a reflection of who you are becoming. So you set the phone down. That's the reply. You light a candle. That's the reply. You open Meditations again, reading the line. The tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do. That's the reply. You cook yourself a good meal. You step outside and breathe in dusk air. You text a friend who has shown up without fail, not out of loneliness, but out of gratitude. You choose your next action based not on a past pain, but a present value. And slowly, you realize something profound. The universe tests your inner strength by offering you the same lesson again. just to see if you've truly learned it. This time you pass. No drama, no speech, just a calm, deliberate stillness that says more than any message ever could. You begin to understand what silence truly is, not absence but power withheld. Not a void, but a signal of discipline. The text sits there unanswered. Maybe they noticed. Maybe they didn't. But here's the shift: you no longer care. Not because you've numbed yourself, but because you've elevated your standard. You've trained your mind to ask a better question. Not what do they mean, but is this worth my serenity? Seneca once wrote. He who is brave is free. And this is your act of courage, not lashing back, not sinking into old patterns, but staying grounded in your values. The brave don't bark every time the world knocks. They evaluate whether the knock even deserves a door. You walk through the city now, and everything feels slower, calmer. Not because the world has changed, but because your inner compass isn't jerking you in every direction anymore. That little impulse to check your phone, it's weaker. That itch to craft the perfect, clever, piercing reply, it's gone. In its place, stillness, spaciousness. But this calm raises an important philosophical question. Is silence always virtuous, or can it become a weapon too? Scholars debate this often. Was the silence of Epictetus an act of inner mastery, or a strategy to withhold connection? When Marcus Aurelius refused to retaliate against betrayal, was he wise? Or was he simply tired of the endless games? The line is thin. And you right now walk that very line. You replay past moments when someone said something sharp, and you responded quickly, too quickly. That instinct to defend, to clarify, to prove. It was never really about truth. It was about fear, about control, about ego. And silence felt like defeat back then. But now it feels like proof that you've stopped playing a game you never needed to win. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care better. You no longer scatter your attention across every passing insult or breadcrumb of interest. You're learning what it means to protect your energy like an emperor guards his borders not with aggression, but with wise restraint. Imagine Marcus Aurelius writing in his tent after a long day on the front lines. The empire is loud, full of turmoil, but his journal is silent. Choose not to be harmed, and you won't be. He could have summoned armies for every slight. Instead, he summoned stillness. That's you now. You don't respond to reclaim power. You don't ignore to manipulate. You simply observe, breathe, and preserve your equilibrium. And here's what's quietly happening. Their ego, expecting engagement, begins to wither. They wanted reaction. You gave reflection. They wanted heat. You gave space. And space is unmanageable to the insecure. Silence becomes their mirror, and it's louder than any retort. You start to feel something unexpected: pity. Not superiority, not smugness, but sincere pity for those still enslaved to needing a reply. You've been there. You remember the agony of needing to be seen, the desperation to provoke a message just to feel real. But you're beyond that now. And when you realize that your silence isn't revenge, it's growth, that's when it becomes unstoppable. You begin to notice something strange about power. It isn't loud. It isn't flashy. It doesn't chase or explain or justify itself. True power, the kind that leaves an impression long after you've left the room, often comes cloaked in silence. This is what they don't expect from you. They're used to chaos responding with chaos. A triggered message, a sharp counter, a scramble to repair what they broke. But now you're building a new habit, letting their message just sit there, letting it dissolve on its own timeline, letting silence stretch until it no longer feels like waiting, but like freedom. You recall how Marcus Aurelius, amid the immense pressures of ruling an empire, would retreat inward, not to escape, but to recalibrate. His meditations are filled with quiet affirmations, not shouts of dominance. The best revenge, he wrote, is to be unlike him who performed the injury. No reply. No need to match their energy. And now you wrestle with your own motives. If you reply, what's it really for? To hurt them, to reclaim pride, or to feed an identity that feels incomplete unless it gets the last word. Here's where Stoicism demands your highest discipline: being misunderstood without explanation, being criticized without defense, being tested and still choosing your inner world over outer validation. Silence in this light becomes your teacher. You start crafting a reply in your head, something sharp and clever. You pause, you breathe. Then you imagine a Roman scribe, quill in hand, deciding not to ink a reply. That's you now. You choose the reply that speaks for itself, non-response. Some might say you're being cold, distant, petty even. But in truth, you're practicing one of the hardest things a human can do: letting go of control. You can't control how they interpret your silence, but you can control why you choose it. Seneca once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." You repeat this silently like a mantra. Every second you don't respond, you reclaim mastery. And yet this is where the internal battle intensifies. Your ego screams, but they'll think they've won. And the Stoic within you whispers back, "You already did," when you no longer needed them to know. This creates a shift. The attention you used to spend rehearsing conversations, checking your phone, decoding their message, you redirect that into yourself, into quiet walks, into reading, into stillness, into becoming so whole that silence no longer feels like absence but presence. You wonder how Epictetus handled betrayal. A freed slave, he had every reason to scream at the world. But he didn't. He trained his mind to see insults as invitations to grow, to detach, to practice control. His silence was not passive. It was a resistance, a refusal to be shaped by others' chaos. And this becomes your own form of rebellion, not the loud kind, but the kind that requires more strength, not reacting. You keep the message unread. You stop opening the app. You imagine Marcus walking calmly past gossip in the Senate, not because he didn't hear it, but because it didn't serve him. He had more important work, ruling himself. So do you. They eventually text again, not with an apology, not with clarity, but with something else entirely: a breadcrumb, a hey, a meme. A message pretending as if nothing happened, as if your silence meant nothing, as if they still hold the power to summon your attention. And for a moment, you feel the pull. The old habit stirs. Maybe you should say something. Maybe you should make them see what they did. Maybe this is your chance to finally be heard. But you pause. Because now you know not every message deserves an answer. Not every re-entry deserves a welcome. And not every connection deserves continuation. You remember the words of Epictetus: "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And this right here is the test. Not their silence, not their return, but your ability to meet both without abandoning yourself. So you ask, what reply, if any, aligns with who you're becoming? Sometimes the most powerful message is the one you never send. Not to punish them, not to appear cold, but because you no longer owe anyone a performance to prove your worth. Marcus Aurelius faced betrayal from men he once trusted, senators, friends, commanders, and yet in his writings you rarely see blame. What you see instead is reflection, self-accounting, emotional discipline. "You always own the option of having no opinion," he wrote. There is never a need to get worked up or to trouble your soul. This is not weakness. This is sovereignty. You've reached the point where silence no longer means withholding, but choosing. Where your energy is no longer poured into correcting others, but preserving your peace. This isn't about ego. It's about truth. Because here's the hard reality most won't say aloud: not everyone who reappears deserves access. Some only come back to test the lock they once had a key to. And if you answer out of habit or emotion, you're not replying from strength. You're reacting from fear. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear that maybe their absence was your fault, but it wasn't. And your silence now confirms it. You walk through your day with a new posture. Your phone doesn't control your mood. A notification doesn't dictate your worth. Your reply, when and if you ever give one, will come from clarity, not chaos. This changes everything. Because now, even if you do choose to reply, it won't be to hurt them. It will be to honor yourself. A boundary drawn, a truth expressed not for revenge but release. And that Epictetus would say is true freedom. Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. You don't control their behavior, but you control the door. You control the welcome. You control whether this is a chapter reopened or a page quietly turned. And now, for the first time in a long time, you trust yourself enough to stay silent long enough to decide. That is the reply. So you don't reply. At least not right away. And at first, that feels strange. Unnatural even. You're used to answering quickly, to smoothing tension, to offering clarity. To being the one who shows maturity by responding first. But now you sit with the silence. You observe your own urges, guilt, restlessness, imagined conversations. The part of you that still wants closure. But then you remember Stoicism never promised comfort. It promised clarity. And clarity often arrives dressed as discomfort. Seneca wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. And what greater test of your discipline than resisting the urge to prove anything at all? Instead of reacting, you return to yourself. You light a candle. You write. You walk through the evening air. You make tea. You clean your space not to distract yourself, but to remind your body that this moment is yours, not theirs. Meanwhile, the message sits untouched, and with each passing hour the pressure softens. The imagined outcomes fade, and the truth becomes louder than the noise. They don't control your peace, not anymore. It's not that you never reply, it's that you choose when and how. And if you do, it's from a place of stillness, not scorekeeping. This moment is a mirror. It shows you what you're made of, not in what you say, but in what you withhold. In a world obsessed with clapping back, with hot takes, with being the last word, you become something rarer. You become grounded. Marcus Aurelius dealt with slander more severe than anything you'll ever face. Enemies spread rumors. Senators plotted behind his back. Citizens doubted his leadership. But still he wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." Let that be your posture now, because your value isn't measured by how you react to provocation. It's revealed by your ability to stay anchored. You're not playing a game of one-upmanship. You're building a fortress, one built not of silence alone, but of self-respect. You don't reply with pettiness. You don't reply to be the bigger person. You don't reply to manipulate their perception of you. You reply, if ever, from the space between breath and wisdom. The space where Seneca once asked, "What need is there to weep over parts of life? The whole of it calls for tears." So you accept this moment, confusing, imperfect, unfinished. and in accepting it, you transcend it. Some may say silence is weakness. Others may accuse you of being passive-aggressive, detached, arrogant. But the Stoics knew people will project what they will. Your task is not to control the interpretations of others. It's to remain in control of yourself. This is your power now, not in the final word, but in the quiet strength to let silence speak for you. So the silence stretched, and now they texted you. Not a grand apology, not a heartfelt explanation, just a short, calculated message. Hey, or maybe been thinking about you? Casual, almost innocent, but you know better, because behind those few words lies a test, a hook, a tug at your emotional thread hoping you unravel. In moments like this, the old self stirs. The people pleaser, the overthinker, the hopeful one who wants closure, clarity, connection. And just like that, you're at war again. Not with them, with yourself. But now you remember what Epictetus taught. If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. You breathe, you don't react, because now you know something deeper. Your silence wasn't punishment. It was preparation. Preparation for this very moment. You reread their message. Your mind starts constructing possible replies. Clever ones, honest ones, cold ones. You draft and delete. You wonder what would make them regret, what would restore your pride. But beneath that, you realize you're no longer chasing ego. You're defending your inner temple. So how do you respond? If you respond, you reply without performance. No need to prove detachment. No need to appear unbothered. That's just another mask, another cage. The real Stoic power lies in neutrality. You can acknowledge the message without reopening wounds. You can choose to be kind without bending yourself out of shape. Or you may choose not to respond at all. Not out of spite, but because it doesn't serve your peace. Because the conversation doesn't go anywhere new. Because the person contacting you isn't engaging from growth, but from impulse. And you've worked too hard to rebuild your clarity. Remember Marcus Aurelius again. It is not events that disturb people. It is their judgments concerning them. You were never disrespected by the silence. You were tested by it. And now you don't owe anyone a reply just because they finally remembered your name. Some scholars debate whether Stoicism promotes emotional coldness. They point to how Marcus rarely expressed affection in his writings. Others argue the opposite, that the Stoics felt deeply but refused to be ruled by those feelings. They chose love over neediness, reason over reactivity. Now it's your turn to embody that. Not by crafting the perfect reply, not by winning the imaginary battle, but by pausing, checking in with your center, listening to the quiet answer behind the noisy craving. You ask yourself not, what would make me look strong, but what would allow me to remain free? This ultimately is the Stoic way. You've walked through the discomfort of being ignored. You've endured the weight of silence. You've faced your fear of not mattering. And now you're calm. Not because they messaged you, but because you don't need them to. So you hold your phone. You smile a little. You remember that you've already won. Not over them, but over yourself. Because the most powerful reply isn't a line of text. It's the life you're now living, silent, firm, and unshaken.